I decided to go stealth camping alone in a camper van in a remote part of Utah. The vast, open landscapes appealed to me, and I wanted some time away from the noise of the city. I found a quiet spot off a dirt road, surrounded by desert and rocky hills. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and red, and I felt a sense of peace. That night, I cooked a simple meal and sat by the van, enjoying the silence. The stars were starting to appear, and it was mesmerizing. After a while, I climbed into the van, locked the doors, and settled into my sleeping bag. The quiet of the desert was comforting, and I drifted off to sleep easily. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. At first, I couldn't figure out what had disturbed my sleep. The van was dark, and everything outside was silent. I lay there, trying to calm my racing heart, telling myself it was just the unfamiliar surroundings. Then I heard a faint rustling sound coming from outside the van. My pulse quickened. I strained to hear, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. But the sound grew louder, and I could hear voices, low and urgent, speaking in hushed tones. Panic started to set in. I moved as quietly as I could, peeking through a small gap in the window curtains. In the dim moonlight, I saw a group of men, 4 or 5, creeping around the van. They were armed, carrying rifles and handguns. My blood ran cold. I had no idea who they were or what they wanted, but it couldn't be good. One of them was trying to pry open the back door with a crowbar. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't get in. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do. I had no weapon, no phone signal, and no one knew where I was. I felt utterly trapped. I heard one of the men say something about a witness. They thought I had seen something I shouldn't have. I realized then that they were here to silence me. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I had to act fast. I quietly moved to the front of the van and checked the driver's seat. The keys were there. I prayed the engine would start quietly, but I knew it wouldn't. I took a deep breath, readying myself for what was to come. With a quick twist of the key, the engine roared to life. The men shouted in surprise, and I saw them scramble towards the front of the van. I floored the gas pedal, the van lurching forward. A gunshot rang out, and I ducked instinctively, feeling the van swerve. The bullet shattered a side window, but I kept driving. The dirt road was rough, and the van bounced and jolted violently. I saw the men's truck in my rearview mirror, their headlights growing brighter as they gave chase. Fear gripped me, but I knew I had to stay focused. I couldn't let them catch me. I drove as fast as I could, the van's tires kicking up clouds of dust. The road twisted and turned, and I struggled to keep control. More gunshots rang out, and I felt a bullet hit the back of the van. I had to find a way to lose them. Up ahead, I saw a narrow trail veering off the main road. It was risky, but I had no choice. I turned sharply onto the trail, the van barely squeezing through the tight path. The headlights behind me grew dimmer as the terrain became more rugged. The trail led into a narrow canyon, and I knew it was my chance. I turned off the van's lights and slowed down, hoping the darkness would hide me. I could hear their truck still searching, but the sound was getting fainter. I kept driving, deeper into the canyon. Finally, I reached a spot where the trail widened slightly. I pulled the van behind a large rock formation and turned off the engine. My hands were shaking, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I listened intently, straining to hear any sign of the men. For what felt like hours, I stayed there, hidden in the darkness. I didn't hear their truck anymore. I hoped they had given up or taken a different path. I couldn't stay there forever, but I needed to be sure they were gone. As dawn began to break, I cautiously started the van again. The engine noise seemed deafening in the stillness. I drove slowly, carefully making my way back to the main road. Every sound, every shadow made me jump, but I didn't see the men or their truck. Eventually, I reached a small town. I pulled into a gas station, my body shaking with exhaustion and relief. I told the attendant what had happened, and they called the local authorities. I knew I was safe, but the fear and adrenaline still coursed through me. The police took my statement and promised to look into it. I didn't have much hope they would find the men, but at least I was alive. I decided to take a solo trip in my van through the forests of Oregon. The idea was to find some peace and quiet, away from the hustle of everyday life. After driving for hours, I found a secluded spot deep in the woods, perfect for parking my van and spending the night. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I set up a small campfire and made some dinner. The forest was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. It felt serene, almost magical. As the darkness settled in, I climbed into my van, locked the doors, and settled into my sleeping bag. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of voices. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the voices grew louder. I peered through the curtains and saw flickering lights moving through the trees. It looked like torches. My heart started to race. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? I stayed perfectly still, hoping they would pass by. But the lights and voices came closer. Soon, I could make out figures moving around my van. There were at least a dozen people, dressed in dark robes, their faces hidden. They formed a circle around my van, chanting something I couldn't understand. Panic set in. I had no idea what they wanted or what they were doing. I thought about starting the van and driving off, but they were too close. I didn't want to provoke them. I hoped they would finish whatever they were doing and leave. But then one of them stepped forward and knocked on the van door, hard. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The knocking turned into banging. They started to shake the van, their chanting growing louder and more aggressive. I was trapped. I knew I had to do something, but I was paralyzed with fear. The leader, or at least the one who seemed in charge, began speaking in a low, commanding voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was menacing. I decided to call for help. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but there was no signal. Of course, I was too deep in the forest. My only option was to try and escape. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my courage. I reached for the keys, my hands trembling. Before I could start the van, the side window shattered. I screamed and ducked as glass flew everywhere. They reached in, trying to unlock the door. I had no choice. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. I slammed on the gas, the van lurching forward. They were thrown off balance, but I heard a loud thud as one of them hit the side of the van. I sped down the dirt path, the van bouncing and jolting violently. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, and I struggled to keep control. In the rearview mirror, I saw the torches bobbing as they chased after me on foot. The road was narrow and winding, but I couldn't slow down. Branches scraped against the sides of the van, and the tires skidded on the loose gravel. I had to get out of the forest and find help. I kept driving, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The path seemed endless, and I felt like I was driving in circles. Eventually, I saw a faint glow ahead. It was a road. I burst out of the forest onto the asphalt, nearly losing control as the van hit the pavement. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I drove until I saw the lights of a small town. I pulled into a gas station, my body shaking, tears streaming down my face. I ran inside, babbling about the people in the woods. The attendant looked at me like I was crazy but called the police. When they arrived, I tried to explain what had happened, but it sounded so unreal. They promised to check it out, but I could tell they didn't believe me. I never found out who those people were or what they were doing. I left Oregon the next day and never went back. I decided to go on a solo camping trip to clear my head. I had an old camper van and thought it would be perfect for some stealth camping. I chose a spot near an abandoned mining town in Nevada. The idea of exploring the ghost town during the day and enjoying the quiet nights sounded appealing. I arrived in the late afternoon and found a secluded spot to park my van, well hidden from any potential passers-by. The mining town was about a mile away, visible in the distance. I set up a small campfire, cooked some dinner, and settled in to enjoy the solitude. The desert air was cool, and the sky was incredibly clear. Stars blanketed the night, making me feel both insignificant and connected to something greater. After dinner, I decided to take a short walk around the area before turning in. As I wandered, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. No sounds of animals or insects, just the occasional rustling of the wind through the sparse vegetation. It made me uneasy, but I shook it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. I returned to the van, locked the doors, and settled into my sleeping bag. Sleep came quickly, but it didn't last long. I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the van. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the steps were too deliberate. My heart started pounding. I stayed still, listening, hoping it would go away. The footsteps circled the van, and then there was a light tapping on the window. I held my breath, afraid to make any noise. After a few moments, the tapping stopped, but the footsteps continued. I decided to peek out the window to see what was happening. I saw a man standing a few feet away from the van, looking around as if searching for something. He was disheveled, with wild hair and dirty clothes. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder. Fear gripped me. Who was he, and what did he want? I ducked back down, hoping he hadn't seen me. The footsteps moved closer again, and I heard him muttering to himself. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but his tone was angry and paranoid. I needed to figure out what to do. If I stayed in the van, he might break in. If I tried to drive away, he might shoot. The man started knocking on the van's door, harder this time. "I know you're in there," he said. "Come out and show yourself." I had no choice. I had to confront him. I grabbed the small camping knife I kept for emergencies and slowly opened the door, keeping the knife hidden behind my back. The man stepped back, eyeing me suspiciously. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "Are you spying on me?" "No, I'm just camping," I said, trying to sound calm. "I didn't know anyone else was out here." "Liar," he spat. "You're with the government, aren't you? Sent to check up on me?" "I'm not with the government," I insisted. "I'm just a traveler." I swear. He didn't believe me. He raised the rifle, pointing it directly at me. My mind raced, trying to think of a way to de-escalate the situation. "Please," I said, "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I can leave right now if you want." "You're not going anywhere until I know the truth," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "Get out of the van." I slowly stepped out, keeping my hands visible. The man motioned for me to move away from the van. I complied, my heart pounding in my chest. He followed me, keeping the rifle trained on me. "Why are you really here?" he demanded again. I told you, I'm just camping, I said. I didn't mean to intrude. He looked me over, his eyes wild with suspicion. Prove it. I didn't know how to prove I wasn't a spy. My mind raced, trying to think of something, anything, that would convince him. Then I remembered my camera in the van, filled with pictures from my trip. I have a camera, I said. I can show you my photos. They're just landscapes and the old mining town. Nothing else. He hesitated, then nodded. Get it. Slowly. I walked back to the van, feeling his eyes on me the whole time. I retrieved the camera and handed it to him, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. He flipped through the photos, his expression softening slightly. These are just pictures, he muttered, more to himself than to me. He lowered the rifle a bit but kept it ready. But that doesn't mean you're not lying. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I'm not lying. I swear. I'm just passing through. He seemed to be considering this, but the paranoia in his eyes remained. If you're lying, I'll find out, he said. And you won't like what happens. I understand, I said, trying to sound as sincere as possible. I just want to leave peacefully. He stepped back, still eyeing me warily. Get in your van and go. If I see you again, it'll be the last time. I didn't need to be told twice. I climbed back into the van, started the engine, and drove off, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't look back until I was sure I was far enough away. The man's figure disappeared into the darkness. I drove until I reached a small town, finding a motel to spend the night. I couldn't shake the encounter from my mind. The fear and tension stayed with me, making sleep impossible. I realized how close I had come to a potentially deadly situation. The next morning, I reported the incident to the local authorities, but they seemed indifferent. The area was known for attracting drifters and people looking to stay off the grid. They took my statement but didn't seem inclined to investigate further. I decided to cut my trip short and head home. The thrill of adventure had been replaced by a lingering sense of dread. The memory of that wild-eyed man and his accusations haunted me. I didn't want to risk another encounter like that. Back home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of not being safe. It took weeks before I could relax again. My friend Sarah and I decided to take a break from the city and go camping in the Appalachian Mountains. We had an old camper van and thought it would be perfect for some stealth camping in a remote part of the mountains. We wanted peace and quiet, away from everything. We arrived in the late afternoon and found a secluded spot off a dirt road. It was a beautiful place, surrounded by trees and far from any other people. We set up a small campfire, cooked some dinner, and settled in for the night. The sky was clear, and the stars were shining brightly. After dinner, we decided to take a short walk around the area before going to bed. The forest was quiet, and we enjoyed the sounds of nature. As we walked back to the van, we noticed a truck parked on the dirt road, not far from where we were camping. It seemed out of place, but we didn't think much of it. Back at the van, we locked the doors and got ready for bed. We were both tired from the day's drive and hike. Just as we were about to fall asleep, we heard footsteps outside the van. At first, we thought it might be an animal, but then we heard voices. "Hey! Who's in there?" a man shouted, banging on the side of the van. We froze, unsure of what to do. "Go away!" Sarah shouted back, trying to sound brave. But the banging continued, louder this time. "Open up," another voice demanded. "This is private property. You need to leave." I peeked out the window and saw 3 men standing outside. They looked rough and angry. One of them had a baseball bat, and another was holding a flashlight, shining it into the van. "We're not causing any trouble," I said, trying to reason with them. "We'll leave first thing in the morning." "Not good enough," the first man said. "Get out now, or we'll make you." Fear gripped us both. We didn't want to confront them, but we didn't have much choice. Sarah and I exchanged a glance, then slowly opened the door, stepping out into the cold night. The men surrounded us, their expressions hostile. "What are you doing here?" the man with the bat asked, his tone threatening. "We're just camping," Sarah said. "We didn't know this was private property." "Well, now you know," he sneered. "And we don't want you here." "Look, we'll pack up and leave right now," I said, trying to stay calm. "Too late for that," another man said. "You should have left when we first told you." One of the men grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her towards the truck. "Hey! Let her go!" I shouted, stepping forward. The man with the bat raised it, and I froze. "You're not going anywhere until we say so," he said, his eyes cold. They forced us into the back of the truck and drove off, deeper into the mountains. We had no idea where they were taking us, and the fear was overwhelming. The truck finally stopped, and they dragged us out, throwing us to the ground. "Maybe this will teach you to stay away," one of them said, kicking dirt at us. They left us there, alone and scared, and drove off. We were miles from our van, in the middle of nowhere. Sarah was shaking, and I felt sick with fear. We had no choice but to start walking, hoping to find our way back. The forest was dark, and every sound made us jump. After what felt like hours, we finally saw the faint glow of our campfire in the distance. We hurried towards it, desperate to get back to the safety of the van. When we arrived, we quickly packed up our things, not wanting to risk another encounter with those men. We drove through the night, not stopping until we reached a small town. We found a motel and checked in, both of us too shaken to sleep. The reality of what had happened started to sink in, and we couldn't stop trembling. The next morning, we reported the incident to the local authorities, but they didn't seem too interested. They took our statement but said there wasn't much they could do without more information about the men. We decided to cut our trip short and head back home. The experience had left us both traumatized, and we couldn't shake the fear that something like that could happen again. The mountains, once a place of beauty and peace, now felt dangerous and hostile. Back home, we couldn't stop thinking about the men and what might have happened if we hadn't managed to escape. It took weeks for us to feel safe again, and we vowed never to go camping in such remote areas without better protection. The trip had changed us both. We learned to be more cautious, more aware of our surroundings, and never to take our safety for granted. I had my old camper van, which had served me well on many trips before. I loved the solitude and beauty of the desert, away from the noise of the city. One evening, I found a quiet spot off a dirt road to park for the night. It was miles away from any town, perfect for some peace and quiet. The sunset was breathtaking. I made a simple dinner, sat outside the van, and enjoyed the silence. After a while, I got inside, locked the doors, and settled in for the night. The air was cool, and the sky was clear, full of stars. I felt safe and content. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a soft hissing noise, followed by a thud. I listened carefully but couldn't hear anything else. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal or the wind. But then I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. I peered out the small window but couldn't see much in the darkness. My heart was pounding. I decided to stay quiet and hope whoever it was would leave. The footsteps moved around the van, and I heard a scraping sound near the tires. Then, silence. I waited for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Slowly, I got up and looked out the window again. This time, I saw a figure standing a few yards away, just watching the van. The moonlight cast a shadow, but I couldn't make out any details. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I had to stay calm and think clearly. I grabbed my phone and tried to call for help, but there was no signal. I felt trapped and helpless. The figure didn't move. I wondered if it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I decided to turn on the headlights to get a better look. My hand shook as I reached for the switch. When the lights came on, the figure was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. I heard the sound of something metallic hitting the ground near the back of the van. I turned off the lights and listened again. There were more footsteps, moving away this time. I needed to see what was happening. I took a flashlight and cautiously opened the side door. The air was still, and the desert was eerily quiet. I shone the light around the van and saw the damage. All 4 tires were slashed. I was stranded. Fear gripped me, but I knew I had to stay alert. I looked around but didn't see anyone. Then, in the distance, I noticed a faint light moving away. It was the figure heading toward the hills. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't drive, and there was no cell signal. My only option was to stay put and hope for daylight. I got back inside the van, locked the doors, and tried to stay calm. Sleep was impossible. Every little noise made me jump. I kept thinking about the figure and what they might do next. As the hours dragged on, I heard a vehicle approaching. My heart raced, unsure if it was help or more trouble. A truck pulled up beside the van, and a man got out. He looked rough, with a grizzled beard and worn clothes. He shone a flashlight into my van, and I felt exposed. "Hey! You all right in there?" he called out. I hesitated but finally opened the door slightly. "My tires got slashed," I said, my voice trembling. "Someone was out here watching me." The man nodded. "Yeah, we've had some trouble with vandals around here. Let's see what we can do." He seemed sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He walked around the van, checking the tires. "You're gonna need new ones," he said. "I've got a spare back at my place, but it's a few miles away. You want to come with me, or wait here?" The thought of staying alone in the van was terrifying. "I'll come with you," I said, grabbing my backpack and flashlight. We drove in silence, the man keeping an eye on the road. I watched the desert landscape, feeling vulnerable. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small, rundown cabin. He parked the truck in motion for me to follow. Inside, the cabin was cluttered but seemed safe. "Wait here," he said, heading to the back. I looked around, noticing old tools and camping gear. The place felt lived in, but not welcoming. He returned with a tire and some tools. "Let's get you fixed up," he said, and we headed back to the van. The drive felt quicker this time, and I was relieved to see my van still there, untouched. We worked in silence, changing the tires. The man was efficient, and soon enough, the van was ready to go. "You should head to the nearest town and report this," he said. "It's about 20 miles west." I thanked him, still wary but grateful. He nodded and drove off, leaving me alone again. I got in the van and started driving, the fear slowly fading as the sun began to rise. By the time I reached the town, I felt a sense of relief. I found a gas station and called the local authorities, reporting what had happened. They took my statement but didn't seem optimistic about catching the person responsible. I decided to cut my trip short and head back home. The experience had shaken me deeply. The desert, once a place of beauty and solitude, now felt hostile and dangerous. Back home, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure and what might have happened if the man hadn't shown up. It took weeks for me to feel safe again. I learned to be more cautious and aware of my surroundings, and I vowed never to camp alone in such remote areas again. The desert's beauty was overshadowed by the terror I experienced, a nightmare that would stay with me forever. I went stealth camping in the forests of Northern California. It was something I had done before, parking my van off a remote dirt road, away from any signs of civilization. The quiet and solitude of the forest were perfect for clearing my mind. This particular spot was deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and dense underbrush. The day was uneventful. I spent it reading, taking short walks, and enjoying the peacefulness. As the sun set, the forest grew darker, and the sounds of nature became louder. I prepared a simple dinner inside the van, locking the doors as a precaution. The isolation felt comforting but also a bit eerie as night fell. Around midnight, I heard a faint knock on the side of the van. Startled, I froze, listening intently. The knock came again, louder this time. I got up cautiously and looked out the small window. A man stood there, looking disheveled and lost. "Hello? Can you help me?" "I'm lost," he called out, his voice shaky. I hesitated, considering my options. He didn't look threatening, but the situation felt off. Against my better judgment, I opened the window slightly. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I've been wandering for hours. My car broke down, and I can't find my way back," he explained. He seemed desperate and scared. I decided to help but stay cautious. "Do you have a phone?" I asked. He shook his head. "No signal out here," he replied. I glanced at my phone and saw he was right. There was no service. I told him to wait while I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the van. The air was cool, and the forest was pitch dark. I kept a safe distance from the man as I spoke to him. "Where did you leave your car?" I asked. "Down the road, about a mile back," he said, pointing in a vague direction. "Can you give me a ride?" Something about his story didn't add up. Why would he be so far from his car in the middle of the night? But I couldn't leave him stranded if he was telling the truth. I decided to drive him to the nearest town, which was a good hour away. "Okay, get in," I said, opening the passenger door. He climbed in, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I started the van and began driving down the dark, narrow road. The man was quiet, staring straight ahead. After a few minutes, he spoke. "You shouldn't be out here alone." "It's dangerous," he said, his tone changing. There was something menacing in his voice now. I glanced at him, trying to stay calm. "I know how to take care of myself," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He smirked, and my heart started to race. Suddenly, he lunged at me, grabbing the wheel. The van swerved, and I struggled to maintain control. "What are you doing?" I shouted, trying to push him away. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, his grip tightening. I fought back, elbowing him in the ribs. He grunted but didn't let go. The van careened off the road, crashing into a tree. The impact dazed me, but I managed to unbuckle my seatbelt and scramble out of the van. The man was right behind me. I ran into the forest, branches scratching my face and arms. The darkness was disorienting, but I kept moving, fueled by fear. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. I stumbled over a root and fell, pain shooting through my ankle. I forced myself up and limped forward, knowing I couldn't stop. In the distance, I saw a faint light. I headed towards it, praying it was a way out. The light grew brighter, and I realized it was another camper, a small fire burning outside a tent. I burst into the clearing, shouting for help. A man emerged from the tent, startled. "What's going on?" he asked. Before I could answer, my pursuer appeared, his face twisted with rage. "She's mine," he screamed, lunging at me again. The camper reacted quickly, tackling him to the ground. They struggled, and I grabbed a nearby branch, hitting my attacker with all my strength. He collapsed, unconscious. The camper looked at me, breathing heavily. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "We need to tie him up," I said, my voice shaking. He found some rope in his tent, and we secured the man, making sure he couldn't escape. I explained what had happened as we waited for dawn. As soon as the sun rose, we hiked back to my van. It was damaged but drivable. The camper helped me load the unconscious man into the back, and we headed to the nearest town, where we reported the incident to the authorities. The police took him into custody and listened to my story. They told me he was a known criminal, wanted for several assaults in the area. I was lucky to have escaped with my life. The experience left me shaken. I realized how vulnerable I had been, and it took a long time for me to feel safe again. I learned to trust my instincts and be more cautious when camping alone. The forest, once a place of solace, now felt haunted by the memory of that night. I still loved the outdoors, but the sense of freedom was overshadowed by the fear of what could happen when you let your guard down. In the end, I was grateful for the camper who helped me and the lesson I learned. The world is full of dangers, and it's important to stay vigilant, even in places that seem peaceful and serene. I parked my van in a remote spot in the backwoods of Louisiana, hoping for a quiet night. The area was thick with trees and underbrush, and the nearest town was miles away. I was on a break from work, looking to enjoy some solitude. The forest was dense and silent, with only the occasional rustle of leaves breaking the stillness. After setting up camp, I cooked a simple dinner on my portable stove and settled in for the evening. The air was cool, and the sky was clear. As darkness fell, I locked the doors of my van, feeling secure in my isolation. I read for a while, the silence of the forest wrapping around me like a blanket. It must have been close to midnight when I first heard the sound. It was a distant, muffled noise, like something heavy moving through the trees. I dismissed it as an animal, but my nerves were on edge. I continued reading, but the noise grew louder, closer. I turned off my light and listened, my heart pounding. Voices, low and rough, carried on the wind. They were getting nearer. I peered out the small window, straining to see through the darkness. Figures moved in the shadows, carrying rifles. My blood ran cold. Poachers, I thought, hoping they wouldn't notice me. Suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping over the trees and landing on my van. Panic surged through me. I ducked down, hoping they hadn't seen me. The voices grew louder, and I could make out words now. "Over here. Looks like a camp." My breath caught in my throat. I heard footsteps approaching, crunching on the gravel. I had to do something. Grabbing my keys, I considered driving away, but the fear of making noise and drawing attention stopped me. "Check it out." "Maybe it's a game warden," one of the men said, his voice closer now. I realized with horror they thought I was there to bust them. The door handle rattled, and I held my breath. "Locked," one of them grunted. "We need to find out who's inside." I had to act fast. I quietly climbed into the driver's seat, keys in hand, and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into reverse, backing away from the men. Shouts erupted as they realized I was escaping. Gunshots rang out, and a bullet shattered the rear window. I floored the gas, heart pounding, as I sped down the dirt road. The van bounced and jolted over the uneven terrain, but I didn't dare slow down. In the rearview mirror, I saw headlights. They were following me. I took a sharp turn, hoping to lose them in the maze of back roads. The van skidded, tires struggling for grip, but I managed to stay on the road. The headlights were still there, getting closer. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to focus. I remembered a narrow trail I had passed earlier, barely wide enough for the van. I swerved onto it, branches scraping the sides, and the headlights behind me swerved too. They were relentless. The trail twisted and turned, and I fought to keep control. Suddenly, the trees opened up, and I found myself on the edge of a steep hill. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. The truck behind me wasn't as lucky. It barreled out of the trees and crashed into the side of my van, sending us both over the edge. The world spun as we tumbled down the hill. The van rolled, glass shattering and metal crunching. I was thrown around, every impact sending pain through my body. Finally, we came to a stop at the bottom. The silence was deafening. Dazed, I crawled out of the wreckage. My body ached, but I could move. I had to get away before they found me. I stumbled through the trees, trying to put as much distance between myself and the crash as possible. Voices echoed in the distance, angry and frantic. They were searching for me. I kept moving, ignoring the pain and exhaustion. The forest was a maze, but I hoped to find a road or some sign of civilization. Hours passed. The night seemed endless, and I was losing hope. Then, in the faint light of dawn, I saw a cabin. It looked abandoned, but it was shelter. I forced myself to the door and found it unlocked. Inside, it was dark and musty, but safe. I collapsed on the floor, too exhausted to move. I listened for any sounds of pursuit, but heard nothing. I had made it. I was safe, for now. When the sun rose, I ventured out, cautious and wary. I needed to find help. After hours of walking, I stumbled upon a road and flagged down a passing car. The driver took one look at me and called the police. It took a while to explain what happened, but they eventually believed me. The poachers were caught, their operation shut down. I was treated for my injuries and given a ride back to town. The experience left me shaken and wary of the wilderness. I still love the solitude and beauty of nature, but I'm more cautious now. I parked my van deep in the woods of Maine, far from any town. I was looking forward to a weekend of solitude and nature. I had been planning this trip for months, wanting to escape the stress of work and the noise of the city. The forest was thick and quiet, the perfect place to unwind. The first day was peaceful. I set up camp, cooked dinner over a small fire, and spent the evening reading. As the sun set, the sounds of the forest grew louder. It was calming, listening to the rustling leaves and distant calls of animals. I felt completely alone, which was exactly what I wanted. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a hike. The air was crisp and fresh, and the scenery was beautiful. I took my time, enjoying the peace and quiet. By the time I got back to camp, it was late afternoon. That's when I noticed something odd. My van's door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it before I left. I checked inside, but nothing seemed to be missing. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I had been careless. But then I found a note on the driver's seat. It was a small piece of paper with just one word written on it: leave. My heart pounded as I looked around. There was no one in sight. I told myself it was probably just a prank, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I locked the doors and decided to stay alert. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every noise outside made me jump. I kept checking the locks, making sure everything was secure. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I fell asleep. In the morning, I found another note, this time on the windshield. It read, "You shouldn't be here." Fear gripped me. Someone was definitely messing with me. I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to let some prankster ruin my trip. I decided to stay one more night and see if things got better. I spent the day trying to relax, but it was hard to shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone lurking in the trees. The day passed slowly, and by evening, I was more on edge than ever. That night, I heard footsteps around my van. I lay still, listening. The footsteps stopped, and then there was a knock on the door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Whoever it was, they were just outside. After a few minutes, the footsteps moved away. I waited until morning to check outside. There were fresh footprints around my van, and another note, "Last warning." Panic set in. I knew I had to leave. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking. As I started the engine, I heard a noise behind me. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me. I drove as fast as I could down the narrow, winding road. My mind raced with thoughts of who it could be and what they wanted. I didn't stop until I reached a small town miles away. I found a diner and sat there, trying to calm down. I called the local authorities and told them what happened. They took my statement but didn't seem very concerned. They said they would check the area, but I didn't feel reassured. I decided to cut my trip short and head home. The drive back was tense. Every car that passed made me jump. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure from the woods following me. When I finally got home, I locked all the doors and windows and tried to forget about the whole thing. But I couldn't. The experience haunted me. I kept thinking about those notes, the footsteps, the figure in the clearing. I didn't know who it was or why they wanted me gone, but the fear stayed with me. I haven't been camping since. The woods, once a place of peace and solitude, now felt dangerous and threatening. I learned to trust my instincts and never ignore warning signs. The sense of being watched, the feeling of unease, it was all too real. I realized how vulnerable I was out there, alone in the wilderness. Now, I stick to more populated areas for my getaways. The fear of being followed and threatened is something I don't want to experience again. I was on a camping trip by a serene lake in Montana, seeking solitude and a break from the noise of the city. The first night was calm, with nothing but the sound of crickets chirping in the distance. I sat by the campfire, enjoying the peace and quiet as I watched the stars twinkle above. But as the night wore on, I heard something that sent chills down my spine. Faint screams echoed through the darkness, distant but unmistakable. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or some animal, but the screams grew louder and more frantic. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Should I investigate? Call for help? My heart raced as I weighed my options. In the end, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way towards the source of the screams. As I approached the edge of the lake, the screams grew louder, filling the air with a sense of urgency. My flashlight revealed a group of people gathered around a small boat, their voices raised in anger. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, the situation escalated. One of the men pulled out a gun, waving it threateningly at the others. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, frozen in place. I wanted to run, to hide, but I was rooted to the spot by fear. The men began to argue, their voices growing louder and more heated. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I knew I should leave, call the police, anything to get away from the danger. But I couldn't tear myself away from the scene unfolding before me. Then, chaos erupted. The man with the gun fired a shot into the air, and the others scattered, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, as the echoes of the gunshot faded into the night. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like lead. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I stumbled back to my campsite, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. I packed up my things as quickly as I could, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I didn't bother to put out the campfire or tidy up. I just wanted to get as far away from that lake as possible. As I drove away, the screams still echoed in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something dangerous, something sinister. I didn't know who those people were or what they were fighting about, but I knew I never wanted to see them again. I drove for hours, my mind replaying the events of that night over and over again. I kept expecting to see headlights in my rearview mirror, or to hear the sound of gunshots echoing through the night. But thankfully, the road remained empty, and eventually, the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the landscape. I finally pulled over at a rest stop, exhausted and emotionally drained. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to process what had happened. It felt like a nightmare, something out of a movie. But it was all too real, too terrifying to be anything but the truth. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to call the police and report what I had seen. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't take me seriously. To them, I was just another camper with an overactive imagination. But I knew what I had seen. I had witnessed something dark and dangerous, something that I never wanted to experience again. And as I drove away from that rest stop, I made a promise to myself never to go camping alone again, never to put myself in harm's way like that. I was out stealth camping in my van in the Colorado Rockies, seeking some peace and solitude away from the hustle and bustle of city life. It was supposed to be a simple retreat into nature, a chance to disconnect and recharge. But what I found there was far from peaceful. The first night went by without incident. I parked my van in a secluded spot, nestled among the trees, and settled in for the night. The sounds of the forest surrounded me, soothing in their familiarity. I felt safe and at ease, cocooned in the warmth of my sleeping bag. But as the days passed, I began to notice things that didn't quite add up. Small, subtle signs that someone else was nearby. Footprints in the dirt that weren't mine, branches snapped in a way that suggested they had been deliberately broken. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the days went by, the signs became harder to ignore. One evening, as I was cooking dinner over the campfire, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as I strained to listen for any sign of movement. but the forest was silent, save for the crackling of the flames. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, a deer or a bear passing through. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Someone was out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every sound, every shadow. I didn't sleep a wink, too afraid of what might happen if I let my guard down even for a moment. The next morning, I decided to confront whoever was out there. I packed up my things and set out into the forest, determined to find out who was watching me and why. I didn't have to look far. Just a few hundred feet from my campsite, I stumbled upon a makeshift shelter hidden among the trees. It was crude but sturdy, made from branches and tarpaulin, camouflaged to blend in with the surrounding foliage. My heart raced as I approached the shelter, my mind buzzing with fear and uncertainty. Who was living here? And why were they watching me? I called out, hoping to coax whoever was inside to reveal themselves. But there was no answer, just the eerie silence of the forest. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Should I go inside and confront them? Or should I turn around and run as fast as I could back to my van? In the end, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped forward, my hand shaking as I reached out to pull back the flap of the shelter. What I found inside chilled me to the bone. The shelter was empty, save for a few tattered blankets and scraps of food. But scrawled on the walls in thick, black letters were the words, "I see you." I stumbled back, my stomach churning with fear and dread. Who had written those words? And what did they mean? I didn't stick around to find out. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced back to my van. I didn't stop until I was safely locked inside, the engine running as I sped away from the place as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the memory of those words burning in my mind. I see you. It was a chilling reminder that even in the most remote corners of the world, we are never truly alone. I never went back to that spot in the Colorado Rockies. The memory of what happened there still haunts me to this day, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurk just beyond the edge of our comfort zone. But I've learned to be more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. And as long as I keep moving forward, I know I'll be okay. I was camping in the forests of northern Michigan, seeking solace amidst the towering trees and tranquil wilderness. It was supposed to be a peaceful night, just me and the sounds of nature surrounding my van. But when I woke up, I found myself in the middle of a nightmare. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, I stirred from my sleep, blinking away the remnants of a restless night. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized something was wrong. There were voices outside, low and guttural, interspersed with the snap of twigs and the rustle of leaves. Heart pounding, I peered out the window of my van and saw them, a group of men, dressed in camouflage and brandishing rifles, surrounding my campsite. Fear clutched at my chest as I realized I was surrounded, trapped in my own little slice of wilderness. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront them? Or should I stay hidden inside my van and hope they went away? My mind raced with fear and uncertainty as I weighed my options. But before I could make a decision, one of the men spotted me. He shouted something to the others, and suddenly they were closing in, their faces twisted with anger and hostility. I panicked, scrambling to lock the doors of my van as they pounded on the windows, demanding that I come out. I felt like a trapped animal, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched frantically for a way out. But there was nowhere to run. The men had surrounded my van, cutting off any possible escape routes. I was completely at their mercy, and I didn't know what they were capable of. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, one of the men produced a shotgun from his pack and aimed it at my van. My blood ran cold as I realized they were serious, that they were willing to use violence to get me out. I didn't know what to do. Should I try to reason with them? Or should I fight back and risk getting hurt? My mind raced with fear and indecision as I tried to come up with a plan. But before I could make a decision, the situation took an unexpected turn. From out of nowhere, a voice called out from the trees, clear and commanding. It was a park ranger, drawn by the commotion. He demanded to know what was going on, and the men reluctantly backed off, their anger tempered by the presence of authority. I breathed a sigh of relief as the ranger approached my van, his expression stern but sympathetic. He listened as I explained what had happened, and he assured me that I was safe now, that he would take care of everything. As the men slunk away into the forest, their anger replaced by sullen resentment, the ranger helped me pack up my things and escorted me out of the woods. I was shaken but unharmed, grateful to be alive. But as I drove away from that place, the memory of what had happened lingered in my mind, a dark shadow cast over the beauty of the forest. Out in the dense wilderness of the Florida Everglades, my friend and I thought we had found the perfect spot for some stealth camping. It seemed like the ideal escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. Little did we know, our peaceful getaway would soon turn into a nightmare. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness descended upon the swampy landscape, we settled down in our makeshift campsite, surrounded by the sounds of nocturnal creatures and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to creep over us, a feeling that we were not alone in the wilderness. It started with distant noises, faint whispers, and the occasional splash of water in the darkness. At first, we dismissed them as the normal sounds of the Everglades, but as they grew closer and more insistent, we began to realize that something was not right. Then, out of the darkness, emerged a figure, tall and imposing, moving with a stealthy grace that sent shivers down our spines. He approached our campsite with purpose, his eyes glinting in the dim light of our campfire, and we knew in an instant that he was not someone to be trifled with. He introduced himself as a smuggler, using the vast expanse of the Everglades to hide his illicit activities from prying eyes. He warned us to stay out of his way, threatening dire consequences if we dared to interfere with his operations. We were frozen with fear, unsure of what to do next. Should we try to reason with him? Or should we make a run for it and hope to escape his clutches? Our minds raced with possibilities as we weighed our options, but in the end, we knew that we were no match for this dangerous man and his criminal enterprise. As the smuggler loomed over us, his presence casting a dark shadow over our campsite, we realized that we had no choice but to comply with his demands. We watched helplessly as he went about his business, moving with a ruthless efficiency that left us feeling powerless and vulnerable. But even as we cowered in fear, a small spark of defiance flickered within us. We refused to let this man intimidate us, to rob us of our freedom and our dignity. And so, when the opportunity presented itself, we seized it with both hands, mustering all of our courage and strength to confront our tormentor head-on. In a moment of desperation, we made a run for it, tearing through the dense underbrush of the Everglades with the smuggler hot on our heels. Adrenaline coursed through our veins as we raced through the darkness, our hearts pounding with fear and determination. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a hidden path, leading us to safety and salvation. With renewed energy and resolve, we pushed forward, putting as much distance between us and our pursuer as possible. And then, finally, we saw it, the faint glow of civilization on the horizon, a beacon of hope in the darkness. With one final burst of speed, we sprinted towards it, our lungs burning and our muscles aching, until at last, we reached the safety of civilization. As we collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath and shaking with exhaustion, we knew that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. But even as we celebrated our victory, we couldn't shake the feeling that the smuggler was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next opportunity to strike. And so, as we made our way back to civilization, we vowed to never return to the Everglades again, to put this harrowing ordeal behind us and move on with our lives. It was supposed to be a simple night of stealth camping in the dense forests of Vermont. Just me, my trusty van, and the tranquil beauty of nature surrounding me. But as darkness fell and the world outside my van grew quiet, I sensed that something was amiss. I had just settled down for the night when I heard a rustling outside, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching my van. My heart skipped a beat as I peered out the window, trying to make out the figure in the darkness. To my horror, I saw a man standing outside my van, his face obscured by shadows. He looked disheveled and desperate, like he had been on the run for days. And when he caught sight of me, his eyes widened with recognition, as if he had been expecting me all along. Before I could react, he banged on the door of my van, demanding that I let him in. His voice was urgent and panicked, sending a chill down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but the desperation in his voice was impossible to ignore. With a trembling hand, I unlocked the door and let the man inside. He wasted no time in scrambling into the van, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he collapsed onto the floor. His whole body was trembling with fear, and I could see the wild look of terror in his eyes. As he caught his breath, the man explained that he was a fugitive on the run from the authorities for a crime he claimed he didn't commit. He begged me to help him escape, promising that he would pay me handsomely for my assistance. I was torn. On one hand, I sympathized with the man's plight. But on the other hand, I knew that helping a fugitive could land me in serious trouble with the law. I tried to reason with him, to convince him to turn himself in and face justice, but he was adamant. With no other options, I reluctantly agreed to help the man escape. We drove through the night, sticking to back roads and deserted highways in an effort to avoid detection. Every sound outside the van made my heart race, fearing that we would be discovered at any moment. But despite our efforts to remain undetected, it wasn't long before we attracted the attention of the authorities. Flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror, and I felt a sinking sensation in the pit of my stomach as a police car pulled us over. Panic surged through me as the officer approached the van, his hand resting on his holster as he eyed us suspiciously. I glanced at the fugitive sitting beside me, his face pale with fear, and knew that our time was running out. With a sinking feeling, I realized that I had no choice but to come clean. I explained the situation to the officer, hoping against hope that he would show mercy and let us go. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that our fate was sealed. The officer placed the fugitive under arrest, reading him his rights as he cuffed his hands behind his back. I watched helplessly as they led him away, knowing that I had failed to save him from his fate. As I drove away from the scene, the weight of guilt hung heavy on my shoulders. I had tried to do the right thing, but in the end, it wasn't enough. It was supposed to be a peaceful night in the remote part of the Ozarks. I parked my camper van by the edge of a dense forest, looking forward to a quiet evening under the stars. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I noticed movement in the trees, shadows flitting in and out of view. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the hours passed, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. I heard footsteps outside my van, slow and deliberate, as if someone was trying to be stealthy. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered out the window, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever was lurking in the darkness. To my horror, I saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line, watching me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't make out their features in the dim light, but I could feel their gaze boring into me. I tried to convince myself that it was just a curious local, maybe a hunter or a hiker passing through. But deep down, I knew that something was seriously wrong. There was an air of menace about the figure, a sense of danger that I couldn't ignore. I debated whether to call out to them, to confront them and demand to know what they wanted. But fear held me back, the knowledge that I was alone in the middle of nowhere with no one to help me if things went south. As the night dragged on, the figure continued to watch me from the shadows, their presence a constant source of dread. I tried to distract myself, to focus on anything other than the creeping sense of fear that threatened to overwhelm me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted, that I was nothing more than prey to whatever lurked in the darkness outside my van. Hours passed in agonizing silence, each minute stretching into eternity as I waited for the first light of dawn to break through the trees. And when it finally did, I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I had survived another night. But as I prepared to leave the safety of my van and venture out into the daylight, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a low, guttural growl, the sound of something primal and predatory. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as I realized that I was not alone. Whatever had been stalking me in the night was still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. With trembling hands, I reached for the keys to my van, my fingers fumbling with the lock as I desperately tried to get inside. But before I could escape, I felt a pair of eyes watching me from the darkness, their gaze burning into my soul with a hunger that chilled me to the bone. And then, without warning, the figure stepped out from the shadows, revealing themselves in all their terrifying glory. It was a man, his face twisted into a sinister grin as he advanced towards me with slow, deliberate steps. I knew in that moment that I was in grave danger, that this man meant me harm and would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. I scrambled to start the engine of my van, my heart racing as I prayed for a miracle. But as the man drew closer, I knew that I was running out of time. With one final burst of adrenaline, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal and peeled out of the campsite, leaving the man behind in a cloud of dust and gravel. As I drove away from the scene, my heart still pounding in my chest, I vowed never to return to that remote part of the Ozarks again. The woods of Washington State seemed like the perfect spot for some stealth camping. I parked my van in a secluded area, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of nature. It was peaceful, serene even. But that tranquility didn't last long. As I settled in for the night, I heard footsteps approaching my van. At first, I thought it might be another camper passing by, but something about the sound seemed off. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. I peered out the window and saw a figure emerging from the darkness. It was a hiker, or at least that's what they appeared to be. They wore a backpack and hiking gear, and they had a friendly smile on their face. But something about their demeanor set off alarm bells in my mind. I rolled down the window and greeted them cautiously, trying to mask my growing unease. They seemed friendly enough, striking up a conversation and asking about my camping trip. But as they talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Their questions became more probing, more invasive, and I began to feel like I was being interrogated. They seemed too interested in my plans, too curious about where I was headed next. And when I tried to politely end the conversation and retreat back into my van, they grew agitated. Their smile turned into a menacing grin, and they took a step closer, blocking my path back inside. I could see the glint of something sharp in their hand, a knife gleaming in the moonlight. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the danger I was in. I tried to reason with them, to plead for mercy, but they just laughed in my face. They made it clear that they had violent intentions, that they saw me as nothing more than prey to be hunted. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged for the door of my van, slamming it shut behind me and locking it tight. But the hiker wasn't done yet. They began to pound on the windows, shouting threats and obscenities. I frantically searched for my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was nowhere to be found. I was trapped, alone and defenseless, with no way to escape. The hikers' pounding grew louder and more frenzied, and I knew that they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Desperate, I reached for anything I could use as a weapon, my hands closing around a heavy flashlight lying nearby. With trembling hands, I held it up as a makeshift defense, ready to fight for my life if necessary. But just as I prepared to defend myself, the pounding stopped. I held my breath, waiting for the hiker to make their next move. But instead of attacking, they simply turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me shaken but alive. I stayed locked inside my van until the first light of dawn, too afraid to venture back out into the woods. When morning finally came, I emerged cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of danger. But the hiker was gone, leaving no trace behind. I packed up my things quickly and drove away from the forest as fast as I could, vowing never to return to that cursed place again. Even now, as I write this post from the safety of my home, I can't shake the memory of that terrifying encounter. It was supposed to be a peaceful camping trip, just me and my trusty camper van in the Texas Hill Country. But as the sun set and darkness fell over the landscape, things took a sinister turn. I had parked in a secluded spot, surrounded by rolling hills and towering trees. The night air was still and quiet, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't shake. As I settled in for the night, I heard the sound of voices in the distance. At first, I thought it might be other campers passing by, but as the voices grew louder, I realized something was wrong. Peering out the window of my van, I saw a group of men approaching. They were loud and boisterous, their laughter echoing through the night air. But there was something about their demeanor that set off alarm bells in my mind. I tried to ignore them, to pretend like I hadn't noticed their presence, but they had other ideas. They began to circle my van, shouting insults and banging on the doors. I felt a surge of fear rising in my chest as I realized I was trapped. These men weren't just passing through, they were intent on causing trouble. I tried to reason with them, to explain that I just wanted to be left alone, but they wouldn't listen. They grew increasingly aggressive, their voices turning into shouts and their gestures becoming more threatening. I knew I had to get out of there, but I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what these men were capable of, and the thought of confronting them filled me with dread. But just as things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. I held my breath, hoping against hope that it was someone coming to help me. And then, like a guardian angel, a park ranger emerged from the darkness. He was tall and imposing, his presence commanding respect. He quickly assessed the situation and ordered the men to leave. At first, they resisted, but when they saw the ranger's badge glinting in the moonlight, they knew they didn't stand a chance. Reluctantly, they backed away, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had come. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The park ranger stayed with me until dawn, making sure I was safe and reassuring me that he would keep an eye on the area. I thanked him profusely, grateful for his intervention. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I packed up my things and drove away from the cursed spot as fast as I could. The memory of that terrifying night would stay with me forever, but I knew that I had survived thanks to the timely intervention of the park ranger. Now, as I sit in the safety of my home, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he hadn't come when he did. The desert night was quiet and vast, stretching out in every direction as far as the eye could see. I parked my van in a remote spot, thinking I was alone in the vast expanse of the New Mexico desert. But as I settled in for the night, a feeling of unease began to settle over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the desert night, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, searching for any sign of movement in the darkness. As I lay in bed, trying to ignore my growing sense of dread, I heard a faint rustling outside. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that I wasn't alone after all. I peered out the window of my van, straining to see through the darkness. And that's when I saw them, a group of shadowy figures lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. My blood ran cold as I realized that I was surrounded. I didn't know who these people were or what they wanted, but I knew I had to get out of there before it was too late. I started the engine and tried to drive away, but my tires spun uselessly in the sand. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was trapped, at the mercy of whoever these mysterious figures were. I could hear them whispering outside, their voices low and urgent. I strained to make out what they were saying, but their words were lost in the desert wind. Suddenly, the door to my van creaked open, and I felt a rush of cold air as one of the figures climbed inside. I recoiled in horror as I saw his face. It was twisted with malice, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. He didn't say a word as he grabbed me roughly by the arm and dragged me out of the van. I struggled and screamed, but his grip was like iron. Outside, the other figures were closing in, their dark shapes looming over me like specters. I knew I was outnumbered, but I refused to go down without a fight. I kicked and clawed at my attacker, desperately trying to break free. But he was too strong, and soon I found myself being dragged away from my van, into the darkness of the desert night. I didn't know where he was taking me or what he planned to do with me, but I knew I had to escape. I racked my brain for a plan, but fear had clouded my thoughts, leaving me helpless and alone. As we trudged through the desert, the night seemed to stretch on forever. I lost all sense of time and direction, my world reduced to the sound of my own ragged breathing and the relentless crunch of sand beneath my feet. But just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a glimmer of light in the distance. It was faint at first, but it grew steadily brighter as we drew nearer. I realized with a surge of relief that it was the glow of a campfire, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I redoubled my efforts to break free, knowing that salvation was within reach. With one final burst of strength, I wrenched myself free from my attacker's grasp and sprinted towards the light. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the campfire. As I collapsed beside the fire, gasping for breath, I looked around at my saviors, a group of fellow campers who had stumbled upon me just in time. They listened in horror as I recounted my ordeal, their faces pale in the flickering firelight. Together, we called the authorities and waited anxiously for help to arrive. It felt like an eternity before we saw the flashing lights of the rescue vehicles approaching through the darkness. But when they finally arrived, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I was safe, thanks to the kindness of strangers and the luck of stumbling upon their campfire in the desert night. As I rode away in the back of the ambulance, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if those campers hadn't been there to save me. We thought we found the perfect spot for a weekend of stealth camping in the dense forests of Pennsylvania. My friend and I, we were eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, even if just for a couple of days. But little did we know, our weekend getaway would turn into a nightmare. As the sun began to set, we settled into our makeshift campsite, nestled amongst the towering trees. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. But as darkness fell, a sense of unease settled over us. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something wasn't quite right about our secluded spot in the forest. Suddenly, we heard the crack of a twig snapping somewhere nearby. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests as we strained to listen for any sign of movement in the darkness. That's when we saw him, a shadowy figure emerging from the trees, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. He was tall and gaunt, with a wild look in his eyes that sent shivers down our spines. Without a word, he lunged towards us, his movements erratic and unpredictable. We scrambled to our feet and took off running, crashing through the underbrush as we tried to put as much distance between us and our pursuer as possible. But no matter how fast we ran, he was always right behind us, his heavy footsteps echoing through the forest as he closed in on us with terrifying speed. We ducked and dodged through the trees, our hearts pounding in our chests as we desperately tried to lose him in the darkness. But he was relentless, his presence looming over us like a shadow in the night. Just when we thought we couldn't run any longer, we stumbled upon a clearing in the forest. Without hesitation, we dashed towards the safety of the open space, hoping against hope that we could find some way to escape our pursuer. But as we reached the edge of the clearing, we came face to face with a steep drop-off, a sheer cliff that plummeted down into the darkness below. We skidded to a halt at the edge, our hearts sinking as we realized we had nowhere left to run. With our backs against the cliff, we turned to face our attacker, our minds racing as we tried to come up with a plan. But he was already upon us, his eyes burning with a manic intensity as he lunged towards us with outstretched hands. In a desperate bid for survival, we fought back with everything we had, throwing punches and kicks with reckless abandon as we tried to fend him off. But he was too strong, overpowering us with ease as he pinned us to the ground with a vice-like grip. We struggled and thrashed, but it was no use. He had us trapped, at his mercy in the heart of the forest. And as he loomed over us, his face contorted with rage, we braced ourselves for the worst. But just as it seemed all hope was lost, we heard the sound of approaching footsteps. We looked up to see a group of hikers emerging from the trees, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they hurried towards us. With a final burst of energy, we managed to break free from our attacker's grasp and scramble to our feet. The hikers wasted no time in coming to our aid, surrounding us and driving our attacker back with shouts and warnings. Together, we fled into the safety of the night, putting as much distance between us and our would-be assailant as possible. And as we emerged from the forest, shaken but alive, we knew that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. I was looking forward to a peaceful camping trip in the remote forests of Idaho, surrounded by nothing but towering trees and the sounds of nature. But what I encountered there was far from peaceful. As the sun began to set, I settled into my campsite, eager to unwind after a long day of hiking through the wilderness. But as darkness fell, a sense of unease settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. That's when I noticed it, the faint sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush, coming closer and closer to my campsite. My heart began to race as I strained to listen for any sign of who, or what, was approaching. Suddenly, I heard the sound of someone fumbling with the door of my van, their movements quick and furtive. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to catch whoever was trying to break in. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I crept towards the van, trying to stay hidden in the shadows as I approached. But as I drew closer, I realized I was too late. The door was already open, swinging wide to reveal the dark interior of the vehicle. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. But as I listened to the sounds of someone rummaging through my belongings inside the van, I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to protect myself and my belongings. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward, grabbing hold of the intruder and pulling them out of the van with all the strength I could muster. They stumbled and fell to the ground, their face obscured by the darkness of the night. But as they scrambled to their feet and turned to face me, I recoiled in horror. It was a stranger, their face twisted into a mask of rage and desperation as they glared at me with wild eyes. I tried to reason with them, to ask them why they were trying to break into my van. But they were beyond reason, their mind consumed by some unseen force that drove them to madness. With a sickening realization, I knew I had to get away from this person as fast as I could. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as I tried to put as much distance between me and the crazed intruder as possible. But no matter how fast I ran, they were always right behind me, their footsteps echoing through the forest as they pursued me with relentless determination. I ducked and dodged through the trees, my heart pounding in my chest as I desperately tried to lose them in the darkness. But they were always one step ahead of me, their presence looming over me like a shadow in the night. I stumbled and fell, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I struggled to keep moving. But as I looked up, I saw the glint of moonlight on metal, a knife, held in the hand of the person who was chasing me. With a surge of fear unlike anything I had ever felt before, I pushed myself to my feet and kept running, driven by the primal instinct to survive at all costs. But just when I thought I couldn't run any longer, I stumbled upon a clearing in the forest. Without hesitation, I dashed towards the safety of the open space, hoping against hope that I could find some way to escape my pursuer. But as I reached the edge of the clearing, I came face to face with a sheer drop-off, a steep cliff that plummeted down into the darkness below. I skidded to a halt at the edge, my heart sinking as I realized I had nowhere left to run. With my back against the cliff, I turned to face my attacker, their crazed eyes burning with a manic intensity as they closed in on me with outstretched hands. In that moment, I knew I had to fight back with everything I had if I wanted to survive. With a scream of defiance, I launched myself at them, throwing punches and kicks with reckless abandon as I fought to defend myself against their onslaught. But they were too strong, overpowering me with ease as they pinned me to the ground with a vice-like grip. I struggled and thrashed, but it was no use. They had me trapped, at their mercy in the heart of the forest. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. I looked up to see a group of hikers emerging from the trees, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they hurried towards me. With a final burst of energy, I managed to break free from my attacker's grasp and scramble to my feet. The hikers wasted no time in coming to my aid, surrounding me and driving my attacker back with shouts and warnings. Together, we fled into the safety of the night, putting as much distance between us and my would-be assailant as possible.